You can speak grammatically perfect English and still leave conversation feeling like you've somehow said the wrong thing. And the terrifying part is you often don't even know why. That invisible gap between being technically correct and genuinely connecting is one of the most painful experiences for advanced English learners. And if you've ever walked away from a social moment in New York, London, Sydney, or Toronto wondering whether you said something wrong, you already know exactly what this article is about.
Right.
The truth is, emotional and relationship vocabulary is the deepest layer of any language. You can master grammar rules, ace IELTS writing tasks, and hold fluent conversations about politics or climate change. But the moment someone says, things have been a bit rocky between us lately, or I don't want to overstep, or she's been really distant since the move, the conversation shifts into an entirely different emotional register.
It really does.
If you don't have the vocabulary to navigate that shift naturally, you either go quiet when you should engage, or you say something technically fine but tonally off, and the connection just doesn't happen the way it could have. This is your guide to exactly that territory.
Oh, undeniably.
By the time you finish reading, you'll have a rich, nuanced vocabulary for talking about romantic relationships, friendships, family dynamics, and the complex emotional landscape that sits underneath all of it. You'll understand how Americans in Chicago open up about relationship struggles differently than how people do it in Edinburgh, Melbourne, or Vancouver, because those differences genuinely matter. And you'll leave with real phrases, real conversations, and the cultural insight to use all of it at the right moment, with the right people, in the right way. Welcome back to the Learn English Lab YouTube channel.
Honestly, it is just so rewarding to be taking this deep dive today. What we're really establishing as our core mission here is understanding that relationship vocabulary doesn't just exist in a vacuum. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
It sits squarely at this really messy, complicated intersection of language, culture, and human psychology. It's not just about memorizing what words mean in some standard dictionary.
Right, because the dictionary doesn't give you the vibe of the word.
Spot on. It's about understanding what those specific words signal regarding your personal capacity for empathy, or your comfort level with intimacy, and your fundamental respect for another person's lived emotional experience. When we talk about relationships, we're basically talking about the very core of the human condition.
I completely agree. And, let me try to frame this with an analogy, because that's really how my brain makes sense of this massive gap between being technically fluent and actually being connected.
I love a good analogy. Let's hear it.
So I always think about learning English, or any language really, like building a house. When you're studying grammar rules, memorizing conditional tenses, and building up your professional workplace vocabulary, you are putting up the framing.
You're doing the structural work.
Yeah, you're hanging the drywall. It is structurally sound. You can hold a meeting, you can order a coffee, and it will absolutely keep the rain out.
Right, but it's just a shell at that point.
Well, spot on. But the emotional vocabulary, the words we use to comfort, to express frustration, or just to show vulnerability, that is the electricity. That is the heating system.
Oh, that's such a brilliant way to put it.
Without it, your house might be perfectly built, but it's cold, it's dark, and it's undeniably impossible for anyone else to comfortably live in or even visit for a long time.
Taking that house analogy further, the real tragedy is that traditional language education focuses almost entirely on the drywall. I mean, think about the curriculum of a standard English class.
Yeah, it's all about asking for directions or ordering food.
Without a doubt. There's a profound reason why language courses spend weeks teaching you how to ask for directions to the train station, or how to formally dispute a hotel bill, long before they even attempt to teach you how to comfort a friend.
Because comforting a friend who is going through a devastating breakup it's fundamentally harder.
It really is. Relationship and emotional vocabulary is genuinely harder to teach because it isn't just about syntax. It carries decades of social weight, regional history, and all these unspoken cultural norms.
And I really want to talk about the sheer weight of those words, because sometimes a single word in English is carrying an entire novel's worth of backstory. We breeze past them, but if you stop and really look at them, they're incredibly heavy.
Oh, the weight of single words in this domain is staggering. Take a word like estranged.
Right. It's just 3 syllables?
Yeah, 3 syllables. On a surface level, you might look it up in your app and see it means separated or alienated, but culturally, it implies a total severing of family ties.
It's so much darker than just being separated.
100%. It's usually accompanied by profound unspoken grief. You're talking about perhaps years or even decades of unresolved conflict and a certain level of heavy social judgment, too.
Wow, yeah, so when someone looks at you across a coffee table and says, I am estranged from my father, they aren't just giving you a casual status update.
Not at all. They are handing you a very heavy, very fragile box containing their personal history. And if you just say, oh, okay,
You completely dropped the box.
you shatter it. Or think about the phrase, we've grown apart. I hear people use this all the time when a 10-year marriage ends or a childhood friendship dies.
It sounds so simple, descriptive even. It almost sounds biological, like two plants in a garden just growing in different directions.
And that biological framing is entirely intentional. Psychologically, saying we've grown apart is a brilliant, gentle way of packaging enormous relational pain into something manageable for a polite social setting.
Because it kind of removes the blame.
That's it. It actively removes the blame. Nobody is the villain. Native speakers absorb the utility of these expressions really gradually. They learn them from decades of passive exposure.
Like watching soap operas or those hushed late-night talks with roommates in university.
For sure. And frankly, going through their own painful personal experiences. They learn how to package their pain so the listener doesn't feel totally overwhelmed.
But wait, I have to stop you there and push back on this a little bit. Because if native speakers get to absorb this over 20 or 30 years of living and breathing, the culture, isn't that a completely rigged game for a learner?
I completely get why you'd say that. It feels incredibly unfair.
Right. If you are a non-native speaker, you just haven't had those decades of passive absorption. You might just have a textbook from 5 years ago. This actually brings us to the real-world cost of this gap, and I want to share the story of Priya to illustrate what's at stake here.
Oh, please do. The real-world application is where this becomes so critical.
So Priya is a marketing professional. She moved to Toronto from India. Now, let's be clear about the drywall of her house. Priya's English is flawless.
Her grammar is perfect.
Perfect. She is exceptionally confident. She runs high-stakes board meetings. She negotiates complex contracts. She is completely fluent. But one evening, she's at a team dinner in downtown Toronto.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, the wine is flowing, people are relaxed, the professional armor is starting to come off, and a colleague sitting next to her starts opening up. The colleague lowers their voice and mentions they're hitting a difficult patch with their long-term partner.
Oh, wow. That's a very vulnerable moment.
It is, and the colleague adds that they've finally started going to couples counseling.
This is the critical juncture right here.
Yeah.
This is the exact moment where the heating system in your house analogy really needs to kick on or the whole room freezes.
And the thing is, Priya genuinely wanted the room to be warm. She wanted to be supportive. She really liked this colleague. But internally, she just panicked.
Because she didn't have the script.
Spot on. She realized she didn't have the specific cultural script for that moment. She didn't know the parameters of what was considered acceptable sympathy versus, like, prying into someone's private life.
It's a terrifying line to walk when you don't know the rules.
Absolutely. So terrified of making a mistake, she just smiled politely, nodded, and completely changed the subject. She literally asked about the appetizers.
Oh, no. Which, to the colleague, probably felt like a door being violently slammed in their face.
It really did. Priya felt like she either had to sound like a clinical therapist, which would be super weird, or she was going to cross an invisible boundary she didn't fully understand. So she retreated into the drywall.
She retreated into safe, functional textbook English.
Yeah. And the result was devastating on a social level. The colleague felt totally unheard, like they had just embarrassingly overshared and been formally shut down. And Priya went home feeling like a total outsider, locked out of the very inner circle she had been trying so hard to connect with.
If we pull back and look at the underlying mechanics of what happened to Priya, we see she wasn't lacking intelligence or even standard vocabulary. She was just missing a specific, highly nuanced toolkit.
Things like emotional availability.
Without a doubt. Concepts like emotional availability, vulnerability, and setting boundaries simply weren't in her active conversational arsenal. And the reason this gap matters so intensely is that in English-speaking cultures, these terms are the literal currency of deep connection.
So it's not a failure of intellect on the learner's part at all.
Not even a little bit. It is simply a lack of that long-term cultural absorption.
But again, my frustration on behalf of the listener is nobody wants to wait 20 years to make a best friend in a new country. Nobody wants to spend a decade feeling like Priya did at that dinner party. How do we hack that absorption process?
That is the million-dollar question. How do we turn the heat on today?
Right. How do we skip the 20-year wait?
You hack the process by intentionally making the invisible rules visible. You don't wait to magically absorb them. You study them like social architecture. And the very first thing you have to realize, and this is a massive paradigm shift for most learners, is that the rules of emotional English aren't universal at all.
They change depending on where you are.
Drastically. They're highly regional. The way you comfort someone changes completely depending on the city and the country you are standing in.
This is my favorite part of this entire deep dive. We are going to look at the 4 compass points of English culture: the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada. And we're going to see how the exact same relationship crisis is handled completely differently in each place.
A fascinating comparison. Where should we start?
Let's start with the United States. Specifically, let's picture places like Chicago or Los Angeles. The vibe here is radical openness and what we might call therapy talk.
Therapy talk is such a phenomenal cultural phenomenon. Americans treat emotional openness as a baseline cultural expectation.
It's everywhere.
It really is. Over the last few decades, largely popularized by media figures, the vocabulary of clinical psychology and self-help has permeated mainstream conversational English in a way that is entirely unique to the U.S.
You hear it all the time, people talking about their love languages or needing to set healthier boundaries.
Yes. Or processing their complex emotions, all while casually standing in line waiting to order a latte.
I genuinely think you can trace a lot of this back to the Oprah Winfrey effect in the 90s and 2000s. The culture actively pathologized and then totally destigmatized, talking about your feelings on a very public stage.
That's a really astute observation. It completely changed the conversational landscape.
So let's look at an example. We have 2 colleagues in Chicago, Jess and Marcus. Marcus has been quiet all morning. Jess, being an American, directly asks if he's okay.
Right, she doesn't beat around the bush.
Exactly. Marcus sighs and casually drops this. Yeah, Kate and I have been having a really rough patch. We started couples therapy last month. It's a lot to process. Now, Jess doesn't flinch. She immediately leans in and validates him. She says, "That takes guts, honestly. I think it's really healthy that you're both willing to do the work."
Let's really dissect that specific phrase Jess uses. Do the work. That is quintessential American self-help vocabulary.
What does it really signal in that context?
In American culture, going to therapy or confronting relationship issues head-on is framed as a proactive, positive step. It is a sign of high emotional intelligence and moral character. You aren't failing. You're doing the work.
Okay, now imagine a non-native speaker who hasn't been briefed on this cultural norm.
Oh, this is where it gets risky.
Right. They hear Marcus admit his marriage is failing and he is in therapy. They might respond with a very logical, literal interpretation of the situation and say something blunt like, "Oh, wow, that sounds like a very serious problem."
Oof, the temperature in the room just dropped 20 degrees.
It really did. It sounds so harsh.
It undeniably does. That blunt response is grammatically flawless. Subject, verb, object, all perfect. But culturally, it acts like a wrecking ball. It totally shatters the supportive, progressive vibe of the interaction.
Because it sounds like a judgment.
100%. It lands as deeply judgmental as if you were saying Marcus is broken. In the U.S., the fundamental rule is that you are expected to meet vulnerability with immediate, enthusiastic validation.
Okay, so that's the American way. Radically open, highly validating. Now let's board a plane and fly across the Atlantic to the UK. Edinburgh, Manchester, London. We are stepping into a completely different universe.
A totally different emotional landscape.
Yeah, this is the language of profound indirectness, where American culture says, let it all out. British culture says, keep it beautifully, safely restrained.
And here is where I see learners struggle the most, because they misinterpret that restraint. In the UK, restraint is not an absence of feeling. It is actually a profound form of intimacy.
That's so counterintuitive to the American mindset.
I know, but there is a deep historical tradition of this stiff upper lip. It's crucial to understand it's not about being cold or unfeeling. It's fundamentally about politeness. It's about not burdening the other person with your emotional chaos.
Right, so you downplay it.
Spot on. When a British person looks at you and says, it's been a bit of a difficult time, to be honest, they might functionally be communicating that their entire life is burning to the ground.
Wow. So understatement is the rule.
Exactly. If they say, we've had our ups and downs, they could literally be on the brink of a messy divorce. The understatement is an absolute art form.
I really want to debate this for a second because my American instincts scream that this is just unhealthy emotional repression. But let's look at a scenario. We've got Callum and Fiona in an Edinburgh pub.
Okay, perfect setting for this.
Callum's long-term girlfriend just moved away for work. It's not going well. Fiona asks if he's all right. Callum stares into his pint of beer and mutters, "Aye, fine. Well, it's been a bit of an adjustment, to be honest."
A bit of an adjustment, classic.
Right. He doesn't say he is heartbroken. He doesn't say he cries every night. He calls it an adjustment. And Fiona, being a brilliant British friend, just nods and says, "You know where I am."
Fiona's response is a total masterclass in British emotional support. Just 5 quiet words, "You know where I am." By not pushing, by not demanding that he spills his guts right there in the pub, Fiona creates an incredibly safe container for him.
So what happens if a learner misreads that?
Well, a learner sitting in that Edinburgh pub might hear Callum say it's an adjustment, misread the severity of the understatement, and aggressively say, "Oh no, that's terrible, what happened? Tell me everything."
And Callum would probably physically recoil.
Without a doubt. Pushing that hard, that fast, completely violates the cultural contract of privacy. In the UK, giving someone space, allowing them to maintain their dignity while subtly signaling that you are a safe harbor if they ever do want to talk, is the highest form of support.
So it really is containment, not repression.
You nailed it. It is containment, not repression.
That is such a crucial distinction. Okay, so from the quiet, contained pub in Edinburgh, let's head down to Australia. Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney. Here we find a fascinating blend. It's a mix of earthy warmth and this incredibly intense cultural concept of mateship.
Mateship in Australia is an undeniable cultural force. It prizes genuine ride-or-die loyalty above almost everything else.
But it looks different than American support, right?
Yes, because it blends that deep loyalty with a very casual, almost blunt emotional honesty between friends. They actively avoid the clinical, overly earnest therapy talk of the Americans because they find it pretentious.
They don't want to do the work.
Right. But they also avoid the quiet, stiff restraint of the British because they find it too formal. They keep it incredibly grounded and real.
Let's picture Tash and Bree sitting in a sun-drenched cafe in Brisbane. Tash just went through a really messy breakup. Bree asks how she is holding up. Tash doesn't use therapy talk at all.
What does she say?
She says, "Honestly, all over the place. I miss him, you know. It's stupid." Bree immediately links arms with her and says, "It's not stupid. We'll get a coffee every Sunday until you're back to yourself."
That's beautiful, practical, grounded support.
Yeah, but what really stands out to me about Australian English is how casually they might talk about serious friction. Someone might be talking about a partner and say, "Mate, she's been doing my head in lately."
I have to ask, does this casual, almost flippant delivery mean they take relationships less seriously than Americans do? Not at all. And that is a major trap for language learners. You might hear an Australian say, "Nah, I just need some space," and think they are brushing off the relationship or that they are emotionally shallow.
Because the tone is so laid back.
Spot on. But that casual tone is actually a vehicle for deep truth. It strips away the melodrama. By speaking casually about their pain or their frustration, they make the pain survivable.
Ah, I see.
It's a way of saying, "This hurts, but I'm strong enough to handle it and I don't need to cry about it right now." The loyalty in Australian friendships is fierce. It just refuses to wear a tuxedo. It shows up in board shorts.
The loyalty is fierce. It just refuses to wear a tuxedo. That perfectly captures it. All right, let's hit our final compass point. Canada. Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. This is the land of multicultural sensitivity.
Canada is a fascinating linguistic landscape. Relationship conversation there is deeply shaped by a constant underlying awareness that the person you are talking to might have a totally different cultural background than you do.
Or a different family structure or religious upbringing.
For sure. Canadians are famously polite on a global scale, but linguistically, this translates into a highly specific use of careful framing and hedging language. They're always trying to create a conversational safe harbor.
I see this constantly. You can't just speak in aggressive absolutes in a diverse city like Toronto. Let's look at Daniel and Priya in Vancouver. Daniel is having intense tension with his parents regarding his upcoming wedding.
Okay, stressful family dynamic.
Yeah, but listen to how carefully he starts his sentence before he even explains the problem. He looks at Priya and says, "I don't want to make assumptions because I know every family's different, but..."
That introductory clause, "I don't want to make assumptions," is doing so much heavy lifting in that conversation.
It really is framing the whole interaction.
Without a doubt. Daniel is explicitly acknowledging cultural differences before he even introduces his personal problem. He is ensuring that Priya doesn't feel alienated if her family dynamics are totally different from his.
That's incredibly thoughtful.
It is. For language learners, especially those coming from non-Western or highly collectivist cultures, Canada can actually feel like the most navigable and welcoming environment. That sensitivity to difference, that careful inclusivity, is built directly into the conversational style. Phrases like, "it comes from a place of love," or "I might be overthinking this," are absolute staples of Canadian emotional intelligence.
We've toured the globe now. We've seen how geography changes the rules. But underneath all of those regional differences, I want to drill down into what I think is the most universally terrifying moment for any language learner, regardless of the city they are in.
And what moment is that?
I'm talking about the moment someone looks across the table, drops the polite social facade, and shares actual, raw, real pain. This is the moment Priya panicked in our earlier story.
Ah, yes. The moment of true vulnerability.
Right. And we need to get our listeners beyond just saying, "I'm sorry to hear that," which sounds like you were reacting to a delayed train, not a broken heart. We were talking about building the architecture of genuine empathy.
This truly is the crucible of connection. In English-speaking cultures, there is an entire, highly developed vocabulary of supportive responses that native speakers cycle through effortlessly.
It goes way beyond sympathy.
Far beyond it. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone from a distance. What we are really talking about is attunement. Attunement is a deep, intuitive responsiveness to another person's emotional state. It's basically reading the room of their heart.
Let's look at a masterclass in attunement. We have this brilliant example of David and Rachel sitting in a diner in New York City. David takes a breath, looks down at his coffee, and reveals that his 4-year relationship just ended horribly.
A really heavy revelation.
Yeah, and Rachel doesn't just say she's sorry. She leans in, lowers her voice, and says, "Oh, David, I had no idea. That's such a lot to carry." And then she adds this absolute magic question. Do you want to talk about it, or would it help more to just have a normal afternoon?
Let's break down why Rachel's response is so incredibly effective psychologically. First, she immediately validates the sheer weight of his pain by saying, "such a lot to carry."
She isn't trying to fix it for him.
Spot on. She isn't offering unsolicited advice about how there are plenty of fish in the sea or whatever cliche people use. But the true genius is the second half of her sentence. She gives David complete control over the emotional direction of their lunch.
I want to pause on that because the psychology of grief is so tied to a loss of control, right? When your partner leaves you or someone dies or you get fired, you feel like the universe has completely stripped you of your agency.
You nailed it. That's exactly the dynamic. When people are in deep pain, they feel entirely powerless. By offering a choice, we can process this pain together right now, or we can escape into a perfectly normal afternoon and talk about movies.
Yeah.
Rachel empowers him.
She hands him back a small piece of control.
Yes. Going back to our house analogy, when someone is freezing in the dark, you don't just say, "wow, it's cold in here."
Right, you hand them the thermostat.
100%. You let them decide how warm they want the room to be. It is incredibly empowering. And it really leans on that therapeutic culture we discussed earlier in the US, the idea of holding space for someone.
Holding space is such a buzzword now, but what does it really mean in practice?
It's a profoundly important concept in modern English. It means being fully present with someone in their pain without trying to change it, without judging it, and without trying to fix it. You are just being a witness.
That sounds simple, but it's really hard to do.
It's incredibly hard. When a language learner can transition from a rigid textbook response like, "I am sorry, that is bad news," to offering a dynamic, empowering choice like Rachel did, they have completely crossed the threshold. They aren't just speaking English anymore. They are practicing deep cultural fluency.
So supporting a friend through a breakup is one thing. You are on the outside looking in. But what happens when the tension, the unspoken problem, is happening between the two people in the conversation?
Oh, that's the deep end of the pool.
It is. Or when you have to articulate the slow, painful decay of a relationship. This is navigating the storm, the language of friction and rupture.
This is the dimension that traditional English courses completely ignore. They teach you how to complain politely to a waiter about cold soup, but they give you zero tools to express that a 5-year friendship is quietly failing.
None at all. So what do learners usually do?
The common mistake learners make here is reaching for highly clinical, almost press release style language. Because they lack the emotional idioms, they might sit down with their partner and say, our relationship has experienced some difficulties recently.
Which sounds like you were reading a statement from a corporate HR department. It's so stiff.
It is incredibly stiff. It completely removes the human element from a deeply human problem. Native speakers rely on deeply nuanced metaphorical phrases here. Let's look at the difference between two very common ones that learners often confuse: to drift apart versus to grow apart.
Okay, let's unpack these. When I hear drift apart, my mind immediately goes to two boats on a quiet, foggy lake that just lost their tethers.
That's a great image.
Yeah, there was no storm, there was no massive fight, just the slow, quiet current of time pulling them in different directions until they can't see each other anymore.
That is a perfect visual representation. To drift apart implies a slow, almost imperceptible accumulation of distance over a long period. It carries a very gentle sadness to it.
It doesn't sound angry at all.
No, crucially, it implies a lack of active agency. Nobody did anything malicious. Life just happened. People got busy. But to grow apart has slightly more agency.
Like roots in a garden.
Yes. It suggests that two people actively developed in different directions. They acquired different core values, different life paths, different political beliefs. They didn't just float away. They rooted themselves in totally different soils.
What about when it's not slow? What about when it's a sudden, violent rupture, like an argument that breaks everything?
In the UK and Australia, you will frequently hear this described as a falling out. It's a great phrase because it implies a mutual rupture.
So it's not just one person dumping the other.
Right. It's distinct from one person actively leaving. It's an argument or a betrayal that fundamentally damaged the foundation of the relationship. Someone might say, I had a massive falling out with my best mate over something incredibly stupid.
Let's go back to our house metaphor. A falling out is like an earthquake that cracks the foundation. You can't just ignore it. But what about when the communication is just broken? There isn't a massive earthquake, no plates are being thrown, but it's just not working. I love the phrase talking past each other or being not in sync.
Oh, talking past each other is brilliantly descriptive. It captures that exhausting, frustrating experience where two people are speaking, perhaps even shouting, but neither is actually hearing the underlying emotional need of the other.
They're just missing each other completely.
Like two parallel train tracks, they go on forever, but they never intersect. And not in sync is a fantastic way to frame a disconnect without over-dramatizing it. It borrows from the idea of music or rhythm. You haven't destroyed the relationship, you've just temporarily lost the rhythm together.
And when you want to fix that rhythm, when you want to stop the trains and get back on the same track, you use the phrase, clear the air. I use this all the time.
It's a very common one.
It implies the atmosphere in the room was foggy or polluted with unsaid tension, and having one honest, difficult conversation brings back the fresh breeze. You open the windows of the house.
What's fascinating here is how different cultures handle the timing of clearing the air. This is a major point of cultural friction, actually. The American strategy for clearing the air is typically very direct and highly immediate.
We like to deal with things right away.
For sure. An American friend might sense a weird vibe at a dinner party, and within 24 hours, they will text you, hey, I felt like something was slightly off last time we talked. Are we good? They want to address the friction immediately before it ferments.
Pop the balloon before it gets too big. I am a huge defender of this American strategy. It prevents resentment from building up in the dark.
It's very efficient, I'll give you that.
Right. You deal with the weird vibe. On Tuesday, it might be uncomfortable for 5 minutes, but by Wednesday, you're totally fine and laughing again.
I completely understand the efficiency of that. But the British strategy is delayed indirectness. A British person might feel that exact same weird vibe at the dinner party, but they will let weeks pass.
Weeks? Just letting it sit there.
Yes. They will actively hope the tension will naturally dissipate on its own. If it absolutely doesn't, they will address it incredibly gently, almost apologizing for bringing it up.
I do hope I didn't say something wrong last time. I'd hate to think things were awkward between us.
See, to my American ears, waiting 3 weeks to address a problem sounds like pure torture.
But the British perspective is that the American way doesn't allow for human grace. The British way allows for the fact that sometimes people just have a bad day. Maybe they were tired, maybe they had a headache.
So you just let it slide.
Spot on. If you leave it alone, it often fixes itself. You don't have to turn every minor mood shift or quiet evening into a massive, exhausting State of the Union conversation. Okay, that is a really fair point. Turning every sigh into a therapy session is exhausting. But the danger for the learner is mixing these up, right?
Absolutely. Using the wrong strategy in the wrong culture can cause massive confusion. An American might view the British delay as deeply passive-aggressive, while the Brit might view the American immediacy as completely exhausting and overly confrontational. You really have to know which cultural room you are standing in.
We've talked about these massive dramatic blowouts, the falling outs, the breakups, but honestly, the real danger for an advanced speaker isn't the screaming match. It's the tiny, microscopic filler words you don't even realize you're misusing. This is the invisible grammar of intimacy.
These are the qualifiers, the hedge words. Native speakers don't even know they're using them most of the time, but they do enormous emotional work.
They're like the mortar between the bricks of the house.
Yes, they signal closeness without making it explicitly awkward. Let's look at the British use of the word obviously. Someone might say, I care about her, obviously. It's just complicated.
Why do they throw obviously in there?
That single word, obviously, is doing incredibly heavy lifting. It is actively preempting judgment from the listener. It tells the listener, you and I are close enough that you already know my baseline loyalty to this person, so I don't need to waste time proving it to you.
It draws a circle in the sand.
For sure. It puts both the speaker and the listener inside an intimate, exclusive circle of shared understanding.
And the American equivalent of that is the word look. People use it at the start of sentences all the time. Look, I love him, but...
Look is a brilliant softening device. It's a verbal yellow traffic light.
A yellow traffic light. I like that.
Yeah, it says, I am about to tell you the unvarnished, perhaps slightly harsh truth, and I am asking you to receive it with grace. It prepares the listener for honesty without making them defensive.
We have a story about a guy named Amir in Vancouver that perfectly illustrates the danger of missing this invisible grammar. Amir is highly fluent. He's a senior software engineer who moved from Tehran. His technical vocabulary is massive.
So his drywall is rock solid.
Rock solid. He can explain complex algorithms without breaking a sweat. So he's at a casual house party, having a beer, and a good friend leans in and says, honestly, man, I've just been really in my head about the whole thing with Jamie lately.
And this is where the English metaphor traps the logical learner. Amir understands the word in, the word my, and the word head, but his brain processes it literally.
Right. He asks his friend what specific thoughts are currently inside his head, trying to logically parse the sentence like a line of code.
Which completely changes the vibe.
Instantly. The confessional, vulnerable mood of the conversation is broken. The friend feels like he has to explain himself rather than just be comforted.
Right, because in my head doesn't mean literally possessing thoughts. It means being consumed by anxiety, overthinking a situation until you are paralyzed, or trapping yourself in a cycle of worry. It's an idiom of headspace.
It's all about how the mind feels, not what it's doing.
The English language, particularly when it comes to emotional contexts, relies heavily on spatial metaphors to describe the mind. We treat the mind like a physical room, in my head, or all over the place, meaning emotionally scattered and unable to focus.
Or not in a great headspace, meaning feeling emotionally fragile or dark.
Spot on. Or carrying a lot right now, portraying an invisible emotional burden as a literal physical weight on the shoulders. You won't find these in standard grammar textbooks, but they are the true, undeniable markers of cultural integration.
Which begs a really scary question for our listeners. Since these words are completely invisible and they are rarely taught formally, how do you even know you're missing them until you've made a painful mistake at a party and ruined the vibe?
That is undeniably the hardest part of the journey. Usually you genuinely don't know until you see the other person's face fall or the conversation abruptly and awkwardly ends. That's why active listening is vital.
Listening to the tone, not just the words.
100%. Listening specifically for how people say things, the rhythms, the pauses, not just what they say.
Well, to prevent our listeners from having to make those painful mistakes in public, I want to map out the entire advanced relationship ecosystem. I don't just want to list definitions. I want to weave through these words like we are telling the story of a relationship's entire life cycle.
I love that approach. It grounds the vocabulary.
Let's invent a couple. Let's call them Sarah and Tom. Let's trace their journey from the spark to the ashes and look at the vocabulary at every stage.
Let's do it. Let's start with the setup. The qualities that make a relationship between Sarah and Tom even possible in the first place. First, we have the word vulnerability.
That's a big one these days.
It is. Historically, this word meant being susceptible to physical attack. But in modern relationship English, vulnerability is seen as profound courage. It means Sarah is willing to show Tom her true, unpolished self. For Tom to receive that, he must be emotionally available.
Emotionally available. That means he isn't entirely consumed by his career or, still obsessed with his ex-girlfriend. He is present and capable of engaging with Sarah's needs. He hasn't built a wall around his house.
Beautifully said. And a healthy start must be reciprocal. The effort, the affection, the text messages, they flow equally in both directions. It's a great word.
And the ultimate goal of their early dating phase is attunement, that deep, intuitive responsiveness we analyzed earlier with Rachel and David.
But then, inevitably, the honeymoon phase ends, and Sarah and Tom enter the messy middle. And there is no word in modern English more perfectly descriptive of the modern messy middle than the situationship.
Oh, the situationship. It's a linguistic nightmare, but it's so accurate. What exactly is it?
A situationship is a fascinating linguistic evolution. It describes a romantic dynamic that exists in a completely undefined, highly anxious space. Tom and Sarah are acting like a couple. They go on dates, they meet each other's friends, but they lack the formal commitment or the title of an official relationship.
It perfectly captures the commitment phobia and anxiety of modern dating.
It really does. And as they try to navigate this situationship, they start unpacking their baggage.
Baggage, we all have it.
Without a doubt. The emotional history, the unresolved trauma from childhood or past relationships that we all drag behind us, like heavy suitcases.
Let me ask you about a specific word here. Codependent. Say Tom and Sarah are spending way too much time together and losing their individual identities. Is codependent too loaded a word to just use casually at a pub with friends?
Yes, I would strongly warn learners to use codependent with extreme care. It originated as a highly specific clinical term in the 70s for a deeply unhealthy dynamic, often involving addiction. It's where one person's needs constantly override the others, or they actively enable destructive behavior.
But people use it all the time now, right?
They do. Pop culture has watered it down, and people use it casually now to mean we spend too much time together, but it still carries a clinical sting. It is much heavier than saying someone is simply clingy or attached.
Okay, good to know. Let's add a twist to Sarah and Tom's story. Sarah gets a job in London. Tom stays in Chicago. They enter the LDR, the long-distance relationship, managing love across time zones.
That's always tough.
And predictably, tension arises. Let's talk about the vocabulary of tension. Tom gives Sarah harsh career advice she didn't ask for. He manages to overstep.
To overstep is another spatial metaphor. It means to literally step over the invisible boundary of what is appropriate or welcomed. By giving unsolicited advice, Tom crossed a line. And Sarah's reaction is to ask for the most loaded two-word phrase in the English language. Space. I need space.
It is terrifying. If a partner tells you they need space, your heart drops right into your stomach.
It is terrifying because it means a sudden need for emotional or physical independence from the other person. It is very often the immediate precursor to a breakup.
So what happens to the relationship then?
Well, if Tom and Sarah's relationship doesn't survive this need for space, their relationship might end up on the rocks. This is a maritime metaphor. It implies the ship of their relationship has crashed into the rocks and is taking on water. It is in serious danger.
Is there the softer version of that?
A slightly softer version is a rocky patch, which implies rough seas and instability, but implies that with effort, you might actually sail out of it.
But Tom doesn't sail out of it. Sarah is hurt by his overstepping, so she starts to keep him at arm's length. Another incredible spatial metaphor.
It's all about physical distance representing emotional distance.
Yeah, she is maintaining distance for her own self-protection. She isn't letting him back into the inner rooms of the house. And eventually, the tension breaks. The breakup happens. Sometimes one person moves on, but for the other, the love remains. It becomes unrequited.
Unrequited is one of my favorite words in the language. It is beautifully melancholy. It has an almost poetic, literary quality to it, yet we still use it naturally today. It simply means love or deep affection that is not returned.
And when a relationship is fully over, people desperately seek closure. That sense of emotional resolution, a feeling of peace about the ending, knowing that all the questions have been answered.
Closure is what everyone wants, but rarely gets.
But what if this wasn't Tom and Sarah? What if it was Sarah and her sister? If the relationship permanently breaks, that brings us back to our early word, estranged, which is permanent, formal, and deeply sad.
But we shouldn't leave the story there, because in English, there is always the vocabulary of hope, the language of repair. If Tom and Sarah want to fix it, they might try to patch things up.
Like patching a hole in a sweater.
Spot on. It uses a very humble fabric metaphor, taking a needle and thread and mending a small tear in the relationship so it can be worn again. Or they might sit down and have a heart-to-heart.
Stripping away the defenses.
Yes, meaning they have an honest, emotionally sincere conversation where both people lay their cards fully on the table. If that heart-to-heart is successful, they might make up, which ultimately leads to reconciliation.
Reconciliation, rebuilding the trust, rewiring the house so the heat turns back on. So listener, having walked through Sarah and Tom's entire life together, I want to challenge you right now.
It's a great exercise.
Imagine sitting in a busy coffee shop in Sydney or at a bustling, loud dinner party in Chicago. Someone sitting across from you sighs, looks down, and says they just need closure from a complicated situationship because the person they were seeing just wasn't emotionally available.
That's a dense sentence.
But imagine the feeling of suddenly realizing you understand every single subtle, heavy implication of that sentence. You aren't translating the words in your head, you are just feeling the weight of them. That is the goal of this entire deep dive.
And that leads us to the most practical question of all. How do you actually start speaking this way? How do you move from understanding it intellectually to producing it naturally, starting today?
What's the first step?
The very first actionable step I give to all learners is this. Borrow, don't translate.
Yes, steal the phrases entirely. Commit petty theft of the English language.
Exactly that. Well, spot on. Stop trying to construct a complex sentence from your native language into English in real time to show empathy. You will get tangled in the grammar, and the moment will totally pass.
So what should they do instead?
Instead, just borrow Rachel's exact phrase. I had no idea. That's such a lot to carry. Native speakers rely on these prefabricated chunks of language all the time. By adopting the whole phrase verbatim, you ensure the tone is perfectly calibrated and you free up your brain to actually just listen to the person in front of you.
The second step is what I like to call the Sunday habit. To hack the decades of absorption native speakers have, you need concentrated passive absorption. Dedicate just 20 minutes a week, maybe on a quiet Sunday evening, to listening to relationship-focused English podcasts.
That is brilliant advice.
I highly recommend shows like Where Should We Begin? With Esther Perel or Call Your Girlfriend. These aren't grammar shows. They are real people talking about real, messy, complicated lives.
The absolute key rule for the Sunday habit is do not take notes.
No pens allowed.
None. Do not pause the audio to look up a word. Do not turn this into a stressful grammar exercise. Just close your eyes and let the rhythms wash over you. Pay close attention to the sighs, the pregnant pauses, the hedging words we talked about.
See how they soften the blows?
For sure. How do they soften a harsh truth? How do they validate pain? Let your brain absorb the melody of emotional English.
And finally, you have to get out of your bedroom and into the real-world arenas. You simply cannot learn this solely in a classroom or from a textbook. You have to find environments where authentic, relaxed, unguarded conversation happens.
You have to interact with real people.
If you are in a massive, diverse city like Toronto or Vancouver, seek out multicultural community centers. They are incredible hubs of shared stories and careful, hedging language. If you are in London or Edinburgh, join a pub quiz team. It's the perfect low-stakes environment that eventually, after a few weeks, leads to deep, genuine friendships.
But as you step bravely into those arenas, I want to offer an incredibly important piece of insight. You must grant yourself grace.
It's not going to be perfect right away.
No, developing this specific kind of emotional comfort and agility in a second language is really hard. It typically takes 6 to 12 months of consistent, intentional exposure. It will not happen overnight.
You're going to make mistakes.
You will have awkward moments. You will misread a room. You will probably accidentally give a blunt American response to a quiet British person. That is not failure. That is simply the necessary friction of the learning process.
It's the cost of entry for building a beautiful, warm house. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for our listener?
I want to pose a final thought directly to you, the listener. Think back to a specific time when you had to comfort someone you cared about in English, and the words simply failed you.
That awful feeling of being trapped in your own head.
Yeah, you felt the warmth and the empathy expanding in your chest, but it couldn't make it out of your mouth in the way you desperately wanted. What did that feel like? How much of your real, full, vibrant personality has been waiting patiently in the wings for your English vocabulary to finally catch up?
It's about so much more than words.
100%. Because learning this specific tier of language isn't just about vocabulary acquisition, it is about learning how to be fully, authentically, unapologetically yourself in an entirely new cultural context. It is about closing the painful gap between your mind and your voice.
Emotional vocabulary is the architecture of human connection. To keep those career doors open, and so much more importantly, to keep those friendship doors open, you must continue immersing yourself in these messy, beautiful, complicated conversations. Keep building the house.
Keep putting in the work.
And to help you keep bridging that gap and to help you become the absolute fullest version of yourself in English, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this Learn English Lab YouTube channel.
The words are out there waiting for you.
Until next time, keep building.